The Ireland into which Swift was born, a country lately torn by the ravages of the Cornwallian settlement, was then settling into an uneasy and brief interregnum of peace following the restoration of Charles II. By the time Swift reached his early 30s, the country was to be plunged yet again into the toils of conflict during the one occasion in recent times when Ireland would signify in the political fortunes of Europe as a whole: the protracted tussle between James II and William III for the crown of the kingdoms of England, Scotland, and Ireland. This tussle would be brutally waged in the length and breadth of Ireland. For much of his life, Swift was to be soul-tugged between the inner turmoil of feeling himself on one hand an Englishman uprooted unwillingly from his native soil and engraved into the unfructuous grounds of the adjacent land, and on the other hand, a denizen of Ireland fired by perditions freely inflicted on his adoptive country by the satraps of the land of his forebears. Among the effects of this instinctive disequilibrium was a tendency to shuttle between England and Ireland, as personal peril or professional expediency would demand. The prime period of political scribbling, in which Swift rubbed up against the highest stalwarts of the government, was spent in England, but the great compositions of his maturity were all written in Ireland. Jonathan Swift first went to England in 1688, during the Glorious Revolution. Political unrest in Ireland, including the closure of Trinity College, Dublin, prompted his move, and there he worked with Sir William Temple. In the late 1690s, Swift wrote one of his best early works, A Tale of a Tub. He later proudly said, "What a genius I had when I wrote that work." Even though the book was published anonymously in 1704, people in London knew it was Swift who had written it. In this work, he satirized the Royal Society of London. He criticized the society's focus on superficiality and self-promotion, particularly its association with the Gresham College and the commercial area of Moorfields. Swift uses the fictional academy of Lagado in Gulliver's Travels to satirize the Royal Society's experimental philosophy. The Academy of Lagado is a parody of the Royal Society, highlighting what Swift saw as the impractical and absurd nature of some scientific endeavors. The Royal Society was founded in 1660, and it is the oldest scientific academy in continuous existence. It is dedicated to recognizing, promoting, and supporting excellence in science and encouraging its development for the benefit of humanity. The Society's fundamental purpose is reflected in its founding charters. The Tale of a Tub caused problems for him. It was meant to be a satire showing the differences between Anglicanism, Presbyterianism, and Roman Catholicism, with Anglicanism shown as the most balanced. Swift tells this story using an allegory of a father leaving his son with 3 coats. His 3 sons being Martin, showing Anglicanism, Jack, showing Presbyterianism, and Peter, showing Catholicism. The coats are meant to last their whole lives if cared for properly. These instructions stand for the Bible. But the sons find excuses to change the coats to fit the latest fashion, showing how people twist religion for their own benefit. Peter becomes arrogant and forces the others out. Later, Jack and Martin also separate. Queen Anne believed that the book attacked religion itself, not just Catholic Church, so Swift was never given a bishop position in the church. This tale was an apology for Quakerism and an attack on the new science of phrenology. The Quakers, or the Religious Society of Friends, were known for simplicity in their speech and dress, direct personal religious experience without any clergy, rituals, or sacraments, and their refusal to swear oaths or participate in war. They were often mocked or misunderstood in satire during the 17th and 18th century because they rejected outward religious formalities, much like the sons in A Tale of a Tub twisted or exaggerated outward rituals. Swift might have sympathized with their plainness, but he'd likely see them too as vulnerable to religious pride or affectation in a different form. Phrenology emerged in the 18th century and claimed that you could understand a person's character by the shape of their skull. It was considered scientific for a while, but eventually became a symbol of pseudo-intellectualism and pretentious science. Phrenologists, like the characters Swift satirizes in A Tale of a Tub, represent people who mistake nonsense for knowledge, who use impressive-sounding language and theories to seem important, while actually being ridiculous. They resemble the false critics, pedantic scholars, or fake philosophers mocked by Swift and other Augustans. Throughout the early 1700s, Swift's emergingly evident literary talents were put to use by the Tory minister of Robert Harley and Henry St. John, in a series of pamphlets designed to praise up the government and heap scorn on the cost and conduct of what became to be known as the War of Spanish Succession in 1701 to 1714. With the accession of George I, Elector of Hanover, in 1714, this precarious world of dazzling influence came to a fast tumbled end. The Tories were out for a better part of a half-century, and Jonathan Swift, appointed in 1713 as the Dean of St. Patrick's Cathedral, Dublin, had to return once more and reluctantly to his birth home and there make the most of things. The reign of George I, from 1714 to 27, witnessed Swift's emergence as an unlikely proponent in the letters of rights of the temporal subjects of Ireland. In particular, his taking up cudgels against the introduction of a profusion of unwanted copper coinage made him a popular hero like none other in his day. During this period too, he wrote Gulliver's Travels, which was published in 1726, Swift's only novel that has long earned a reputation remote from the world of macabre and is rightly esteemed as a pinnacle of early 18th century literature. Its structure is a four-part narration of the adventures of Lemuel Gulliver, who takes in a shipwreck, piracy, near-death mishaps in a land of giants called Brobdingnag, the niggling inflictions endured by a mortal of normal size in a coastal kingdom of little people, and a terrestrial realm of eerie peacefulness called the Hohenland, where the reigning caste are rationalist-speaking horses, and a species of ogre subhuman occupies the role of underline. Other vividly rendered oddities include the Strudbrugs, or immortals, of Lugnag, whose gift of long life is a curse of perpetual decrepitude and descending senility, rather than eternal indulgence in all desired things. A contrast to the central premise of the picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, in which the everlasting loveliness of a portrait and a man's swift slippage into senescence and ill-living are made to trade places. In 1729, Swift wrote a modest proposal for preventing the children of poor people in Ireland from being a burden to their parents or country, and for making them beneficial to the public. The gist of this is nothing less than a cynical process of advocacy, that the plenitude of children in the kingdom, brought up to thieving, roguery, and general uselessness, should instead be made objects of national utility by being bred to serve at the dinner table as food. A child will make 2 dishes at an entertainment for friends, and when the family dines alone, the fore or hind quarters will make a seasonable dish, and seasoned with a little pepper or salt will be very good. In elaborations of this stark, unsettling sort can be discerned a crucial differentiator between the yet to emerge fully Gothic tradition in Irish letters, and that which would set sail under a more robust wind in England. Not for the first time, the Dean of St. Patrick was taking at his theme the exploitations extracted on the Irish poor by the absentee landlordism and agrarious distinctions of religion and wealth, and it was to draw outlandish attention to those failures in a skewed society that the modest proposal was written. Swift's A Modest Proposal has long been regarded as a perfect example of its kind. In 1974, Wayne Booth named it the finest of all ironic satires, a defining instance of what he calls the ironic sublime. The term ironic sublime refers to a literary or artistic technique where the sublime, something grand, awe-inspiring, or noble, is presented in a way that is undermined by irony. The ironic sublime creates a moment that seems to be majestic or profound, but is actually meant to be mocked or questioned. It's common in satire, especially in Augustan literature, like that of Swift or Fielding, where grand themes or styles are exaggerated to the point of absurdity to critique them. There are 2 ways to read the Modest Proposal. One is against mercantilist thought, a proposal that attacks vicariously the mercantilist thinking of Swift's day and the economic projectors who embraced mercantilist views. The value placed on populousness per se in mercantilist thought, the argument that people are the wealth of the nation. the regressive tax policies proposed by Irish Parliament in 1729, the language of market rationality that underwrote the 18th century slave trade, and the members of the Irish upper class who worsened Ireland's poverty by colluding with English oppression. The second way in which you can read it is against Irish barbarism. During this time, the modest proposal had been studied through the lens of biography as intensively as that of cultural, political, and economic history. The result has been a Swift whose identity as an Irishman and whose loathing of the Irish poor, to whom he was persistently charitable, but whom he often reviled as immoral and indolent, significantly complicates his relationship to his satiric persona. Swift's sense of himself as Irish constituted a tortured identification with a despised and barbaric cultural subgroup. Swift's modest proposal is an Irish barbarian appealing to others of his kind, and his speaker's cannibalistic proposal involves the routine sacrifice of related barbarians, for all of whom Swift felt a roiling mixture of complicit anguish and disgust. One of Swift's biographers, Churton Collins, affirms that he drew his yahoos from some of the degraded Irish peasants of the famine periods. There is no real mystery about Swift's personality. He was an angry idealist, thundering at a corrupt world. Swift was not a mere scold. Though he believed, like Carlyle, that men are mostly fools, he bruised himself in Gulliver with a program of perfectibility for mankind. He did not dwell in so much detail as did Arnold on the possibilities of a widespread culture, and in so far he was undoubtedly inferior to the later critic as a social reformer. In his ideal commonwealth of the Hohems, reason is the guide of life. Impulses, sentiments have no place. Friendship and benevolence are the chief virtues. Parents have no especial fondness for their children. The whole race is the object of their affection. They need no government because they have attained self-discipline. Power, government, war, law, punishment, and 1,000 other things had no terms wherein that language could express them. They never lie, and Gulliver's master is forced to the paraphrase, the thing that is not, in order to define falsehood. Likewise, they have no word for courtship or love. In a letter to Pope, Swift justifies the writing of Gulliver by the exclamation, "Oh, if the world had but a dozen Arbuthnot's in it, I would burn my travels." John Arbuthnot was a close friend of Jonathan Swift. They were both prominent writers and satirists of the early 18th century. It is a fine tribute to the man whom Pope also loved and to whom he dedicated his famous epistle. Gulliver reveals Swift's most marvelous expression of moral indignation. Many readers have apparently looked into the terrible mirror of the yahoos and have perceived themselves, or rather, their lower selves. This has aroused most resentment against the author of Gulliver. A lively lady of the court, after perusing his definition of her kind as a sieve, presumably on account of a capacity to leak secrets of state, humorously signed herself Sieve Yahoo. But her sense of humor was stronger than that of most readers. Did Swift, however, intend the Yahoo to represent the average man? There is no good evidence of it. On the contrary, he seems to have painted a picture, overwhelmingly hideous, it is true, of the possibilities of degradation which inhere in humanity. On the contrary, careless readers have failed to make the distinction, and it must be confessed that Swift has perhaps not marked it out with sufficient clearness. The truth, nevertheless, is that the Hohems represent a higher type, and the Yahoos a lower type. Man himself is represented by Gulliver alone. So far you can notice that Swift's early satire would be witty and playful, but not biting, which will focus on books, scholars, and church vanity, like The Tale of a Tub. Then his middle satire would start becoming moral and political, fighting real-world injustice with irony, like The Modest Proposal or The Drapier's Letters, a series of pamphlets that were written under a pseudonym opposing England's economic oppression of Ireland. Here, satire becomes a weapon of resistance for Swift. His later satire becomes dark, psychological, and almost hopeless. For example, Gulliver's Travels. Swift is the architect of modern satire, a master of both Horatian wit and biting juvenile satire. He is a prototypical theorist who engaged in deep political thinking before the formal discipline of political theory was established as we know it today. In Swift's case, he didn't write political theory like Locke or Hobbes. but his satirical works wrestled with political ideas like power and tyranny, economic exploitation, and national sovereignty. He uses fiction and irony as tools of political argument, predicting methods used by later theorists and political critics. In an introduction to an edition of Gulliver's Travels, Professor Ernest Birbaum maintains that Swift is not a pessimist, that he does not, like Schopenhauer, display incredulity of human goodness and a conviction that all things in the universe tend to evil. And I believe Professor Birbaum is right in his judgment, that one of his consequences of Great War will be the sober re-evaluation of great books, among them being Gulliver's Travels. Over time, Swift evolved from Whig-aligned religious writer to Tory champion under the Harley ministry. His alignment with Harley's government led to his appointment as the Dean of St. Patrick's in 1730, confirming his dual influence in the politics and the church. In an age of unimaginative men, Swift was one of the most imaginative of English writers. The piercing vision of his satire on the destiny for earthly immortality has been praised by Leslie Stephen in terms almost unrestrained. She says that no poetic picture in Dante or Milton can exceed the strange power of his prose description of the Struldbrugs. The praise, nevertheless, is not excessive. The profound originality of Swift is proof of a mind of the first order. Gulliver makes most other books look commonplace. As satire, it is far superior to A Tale of a Tub, both in breadth of conception and depth of thought. It is marred by certain passages of unessential coarseness, but these were apparently due to the author's own fastidiousness. This was apparently due to the author's own fastidious personal habits and his rage against uncleanliness in others. The presence of filth in the world, whether physical or other, drew him by a morbid fascination. And yet, Gulliver is full of pure delight to children. Swift was a strange combination of playful imagination and furious invective. His object, however, is always that of Arnold and other great liberals and reformers. It is the search for truth. This was all about Jonathan Swift. If you'd like to know more about the Augustan Age or other Augustan writers, have a look at these lectures.